Burkina Faso, meaning land of upright people in the Moor and Dioula languages, is a landlocked country in West Africa that has experienced a rich and complex history spanning over a millennium. From ancient kingdoms to colonial rule, from revolutionary leadership to modern democratic struggles, Burkina Faso's story reflects the broader narrative of African resilience, cultural diversity, and the ongoing quest for political stability and economic development. The history of present-day Burkina Faso begins with evidence of human settlement dating back thousands of years. The area's strategic location along trans-Saharan trade routes made it a crossroads of cultures, commerce, and ideas. By the 11th century, several powerful kingdoms had emerged, most notably the Mossi Kingdom comprising states including Ouagadougou, Yatenga, Tenkodogo, and Fada Ngirima. The Mossi people established sophisticated political systems centered around the Mugo Naba emperor in Ouagadougou. The Mossi kingdoms were remarkable for resisting external influence from the Mali and Songhai empires. Unlike many neighbors, they largely resisted conversion to Islam, maintaining traditional religious practices and political structures. This preserved their cultural identity but isolated them from broader Islamic trading networks. The pre-colonial Mossi society was highly stratified, with a complex hierarchy including the royal family, nakams, nobles, commoners, and artisan castes. The economy was primarily agricultural, based on millet, sorghum, and livestock. Other ethnic groups included the Bobo, Lobi, Senufo, and Fulani peoples, each with distinct cultures and territories. The French colonial expansion reached present-day Burkina Faso in the late 19th century, facing significant resistance from the Mossi kingdoms and other local powers. The French established a protectorate over Ouagadougou in 1896, but full conquest took several years. In 1919, the French created the colony of Upper Volta, Haute Volta, named after the three main rivers flowing through the territory. However, in 1932, facing economic difficulties, the French dissolved the colony and divided its territory among neighboring colonies. This unpopular division was reversed in 1947 when Upper Volta was reconstituted as a separate colony. French colonial rule brought significant changes including new taxation systems, cash crops like cotton, and limited education through missionary and government schools. Infrastructure development remained minimal and primarily served colonial extraction needs. The post-World War II period saw emerging nationalist movements. The creation of the French Union in 1946 granted limited political representation, and Upper Volta elected its first representatives to the French National Assembly. Key political figures like Mossi Empire emerged, advocating for greater autonomy and eventually independence through organizations like the Rassemblement Démocratique Africain, RDA. Upper Volta gained independence on August 5, 1960, with Mossi Empire as its first president. The new nation faced enormous challenges: extreme poverty, landlocked geography, limited resources, and a largely rural, illiterate population dependent on subsistence agriculture. Yamego's administration struggled with corruption, authoritarianism, and economic mismanagement. Popular discontent culminated in the January days of 1966 when widespread strikes and demonstrations erupted. Lieutenant Colonel Sangoul Lamizana took power in a bloodless coup on January 3, 1966. Lamizana ruled for 14 years, initially as military leader and later as elected president. His period saw some progress, but recurring droughts, economic crises, and political tensions made governance difficult. The devastating Sahel drought of the early 1970s highlighted the country's environmental vulnerability. In 1980, Colonel Say Zirbo overthrew Lamizana, promising to combat corruption. However, Zerbo lasted only 2 years before Major Jean-Baptiste Ouedraogo seized power in 1982. Internal divisions within Tzadin, Ouedraogo's government between moderate and radical factions led to tensions that culminated in Captain Thomas Sankara's coup in 1983. Thomas Sankara's coup on August 4, 1983, marked a dramatic turning point in the country's history. A charismatic 33-year-old military officer influenced by Marxist ideology and Pan-African thought, Sankara promised revolutionary change. His government, officially called the National Council of the Revolution, CNR, embarked on an ambitious program of social, economic, and political transformation. One of Sankara's first major acts was changing the country's name from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso in 1984. This symbolic gesture, using words from the local Moor and Dioula languages, was intended to break with the colonial past and assert African identity and dignity. Sankara's government implemented radical policies aimed at achieving self-reliance and social justice. Land reform redistributed territory from traditional chiefs to peasant cooperatives. The government launched massive vaccination campaigns, tree planting programs, and infrastructure projects using voluntary labor from citizens. Women's rights became a central focus of the revolution. Sankara's government banned female genital mutilation, forced marriages, and promoted women's education and participation in government. These policies were revolutionary in the West African context, but also controversial among traditional communities. The government also pursued anti-corruption campaigns, reduced government salaries, including Sankara's own, and promoted local production over imports. Sankara famously refused foreign aid that he considered neo-colonial and advocated for debt cancellation for African countries. Sankara became an international icon of African nationalism and socialist revolution. His speeches at international forums, particularly at the United Nations and Organization of African Unity, made him a prominent voice for African dignity and anti-imperialism. However, his radical policies and outspoken criticism of Western powers and neighboring African leaders made him many enemies. Domestically, his government faced opposition from traditional chiefs, whose power had been reduced, and from parts of the military and civil service. On October 15, 1987, Sankara was killed in a coup led by his former friend and close associate, Captain Blaise Compaoré. The circumstances of Sankara's death remained controversial for decades, with many viewing it as an assassination orchestrated by foreign powers opposed to his revolutionary policies. Blaise Compaoré's rise to power marked a shift from Sankara's revolutionary policies toward pragmatism. He gradually abandoned socialist policies, embracing market-oriented reforms and closer Western ties. Compaoré established dominance through his Congress for Democracy and Progress (CDP) party while skillfully managing political crises. Under international pressure, Burkina Faso implemented structural adjustment programs during the 1990s involving currency devaluation, privatization, and reduced government spending. While bringing some growth and investment, these reforms increased inequality and social tensions. The country remained dependent on cotton exports and gold mining. Compaoré positioned himself as a regional mediator in conflicts across West Africa, though his involvement was controversial. He maintained international support through diplomatic balancing between France, the United States, and China.
Despite political control, civil society became increasingly vocal. The 1998 assassination of journalist Norbert Zongo, investigating high-level corruption, became a rallying point for opposition. Student organizations, labor unions, and civil society groups organized regular protests, laying groundwork for eventual popular uprising. In 2014, tensions came to a head when Compaoré attempted to amend the constitution to allow him to run for a fifth presidential term. This proposal sparked massive popular opposition, as it was seen as a betrayal of democratic principles and an attempt to establish a presidency for life. Opposition groups, civil society organizations, and ordinary citizens organized under the banner of Le Balai Citoyen, the Citizens' Broom, and other movements. The protests grew in size and intensity throughout 2014, culminating in a massive uprising on October 31, 2014. On October 30, 2014, as Parliament prepared to vote on the constitutional amendment, hundreds of thousands of protesters surrounded the National Assembly building in Ouagadougou. When security forces used tear gas and live ammunition against protesters, the demonstrations intensified. Protesters stormed and burned the Parliament building, City Hall, and other government buildings. Faced with this popular uprising and military reluctance to continue defending his regime, Compaoré fled the country on October 31, 2014, ending his 27-year rule. Following Compaoré's departure, the military initially took power, but faced continued popular pressure for civilian rule. After a brief period of uncertainty, including an attempted coup by Compaoré loyalists in September 2015, a civilian transitional government was established. The transition period, led by Michel Kafando as transitional president and Isaac Zida as prime minister, organized democratic elections in November 2015. These elections, widely considered free and fair, were won by Roch-Marc Christian Kaboré of the People's Movement for Progress, MPP. Roch-Marc Christian Kaboré's election represented a peaceful democratic transition and raised hopes for political stability and economic development. His government pursued policies aimed at fighting corruption, improving governance, and promoting economic growth. However, Kaboré's presidency was increasingly dominated by a growing security crisis. Jihadist groups, initially based in Mali, began operating in northern Burkina Faso around 2015, launching attacks against security forces, civilians, and international targets. The security situation deteriorated rapidly after 2018, with jihadist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State expanding their presence across the country. These groups exploited ethnic tensions, governance gaps, and economic grievances to recruit fighters and establish control over territory. The government's response, supported by French and international forces, proved inadequate to contain the growing insurgency. By 2021, large parts of the country were under jihadist control or influence, with over 1 million people internally displaced and thousands killed. The security crisis and perceived government incompetence led to growing military and popular discontent. On January 24, 2022, military officers led by Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba overthrew Kaboré's government, citing the failure to address the security crisis. However, Damiba's government also struggled with the security challenges, leading to another military coup on September 30, 2022, bringing Captain Ibrahim Traoré to power. This second coup reflected continued frustration with the inability to address the country's security and governance challenges. As of 2024, Burkina Faso continues to face significant challenges, including ongoing jihadist violence, humanitarian crises, economic difficulties, and questions about the restoration of democratic governance. The military government has promised eventual return to civilian rule while focusing on addressing security concerns. The history of Burkina Faso reflects the broader challenges and opportunities facing African nations in the modern era. From the sophisticated pre-colonial Mossi kingdoms through the colonial disruption, the hopes of independence, the revolutionary experiment under Sankara, the long authoritarian rule under Compaoré, and the current struggles with democracy and security, Burkina Faso's story embodies themes of resilience, cultural pride, and the ongoing quest for political stability and economic development. The country's rich cultural heritage, exemplified by its diverse ethnic groups, traditional arts, and the legacy of leaders like Thomas Sankara, continues to inspire both its citizens and admirers worldwide. However, the current security crisis and political instability represent serious challenges that will require innovative solutions, regional cooperation, and sustained commitment to democratic governance and human rights. As Burkina Faso moves forward, its history provides both cautionary tales and sources of inspiration. The country's experience demonstrates both the possibilities and limitations of revolutionary change, the importance of inclusive governance, and the ongoing relevance of Sankara's vision of dignity, self-reliance, and Pan-African solidarity. The ultimate goal remains building a stable, democratic, and prosperous nation that honors its rich heritage while meeting the aspirations of its people for security, development, and human rights. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more engaging historical content.